You're right, Jerome.
I'm alright, Carl. How are we doing this evening?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad.
Not too bad.
So, I just want to start off with. It's been a while since we did that introductory episode. Not that many people saw it, but a lot's gone on since then, and been a lot of changes. So we're sort of changing tact a bit. We will sort of still go into the history of things, but it won't be the main focus of our discussions.
No, not quite.
So, yeah. But what I wanted to talk about was this national conservatism. Have you seen that lately?
Yeah, it's been all over Twitter, been pushed by Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, Home Secretary Suella Braverman is giving their endorsements. They seem to be everywhere all of a sudden, and it doesn't seem real. But unfortunately, it seems there are some people who are falling for it when they shouldn't.
Yeah, they seem to be giving the right signals in certain areas, but are then conveniently or woefully ignorant of the more important parts of national conservatism. They seem to be keeping it very liberal to some extent, rather than actually taking on the liberal system. But it's I find it interesting how they switched towards this kind of rhetoric when they didn't even venture this far when it came to Brexit.
No, the focus was far more on Brexit, about sort of internationalism. Whether the European Union was the right kind of internationalism for Britain. And even people like Farage, although he was putting on the anti-immigration talk, it was the tagline, wasn't it? Global Brexit Britain, over and over again. Lovely, a three-word phrase that you can ram down people's throats over and over again. God, I love politics. It seems to be everything's built off three-word phrases.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the only thing that makes it significant now than say 3 years ago, because they have been around for a few years, and they are an American movement, is that I think this was the first time.
Well,
they had
American slash a country in the Middle East, which I won't name.
Yeah,
Oman, the American Omani.
Yeah. the Yeah, I think it was the Edmund Burke Society that invited them. But it's
just to clear that up, Carl. Sorry. So the Edmund Burke Society is a separate institution from Yoram Hazony, Steve Bannon, and the National Conservatives.
Yeah, but I think they invited them and hosted it with them.
I see. Yeah.
So I think they hosted them. Which I find it funny because Edmund Burke was a big advocate for sort of traditional values or sort of a national conservatism, but he identified in crucial parts that have to exist in order for it to work, which they've conveniently left out.
And we'll go through that. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, because of its ramifications to a plural society, pluralism, basically. The sort of multiculturalism.
And it is sort of one big lie, essentially, what they pulled over the last couple of weeks. That they sort of use the trappings of an older form of conservatism, a national conservatism. They even steal the name. Yet they don't actually believe any of the things. Their basis goes back to a sort of a classical liberal, pre-woke sort of political culture. And when I say pre-woke, I mean like 1990s, 1980s style. I don't think any of them did give a roaring Maggie Thatcher, Ronald Reagan speech, but a lot of them sounded exactly like Thatcher and Reagan. We all know the problems with them.
Yeah, it's definitely more aligned with one nation Toryism than it actually is sort of a national or a true conservatism. I mean, this might surprise people, but a true conservatism is not liberal in any way, and it's just not. They are entirely opposed to each other in how they see the world.
And in terms of some people, before we get in, sort of the definitions of national conservatism and like one nation. So my definition of one nationism it might be a little heterodox, but of course it goes back to the ideas of Benjamin Disraeli. Essentially, it's a philosophy of tricking the working classes and middle classes of Britain into supporting the sort of liberal state.
I don't think it was so much tricking them, but it definitely involved handouts in terms of benefits and helping them, getting involved with the franchise of owning property. So it was Benjamin Disraeli's attempt to sort of introduce sort of the welfare state to Toryism.
Yes. I suppose you see it was a way. What I meant by sort of tricking was like it's a way to head off other forces of nationalism, forces of socialism, forces of Marxism, anti-liberal thinking that was prevalent in the 19th and first half of the 20th century, and the Tories carried it through really with the sort of post-war consensus as well, until you have Thatcher, where you have sort of the new liberal revolution in politics, and particularly in the Tory party as well. And they still haven't recovered from that either. And this national conservatism is a joke for what they're pushing. But yeah, your definition of national conservatism then, Carl.
Well, before I get onto that, I think it's best to clarify what Benjamin Disraeli did, and that is that he did accept the liberal understanding of the good life, or in a sense the rejection of the common good, and that good was singular, not singular. It was plural. It was the individual, and rather than the singular in terms of unity in state, in church, in morality. So it was an absolute capitulation by the Conservative Party to liberalism.
Yes.
Which it's important to note, because obviously that's when there was no real opposition to liberalism in Britain after that point. Considering that we fought against revolutionary France to hold back these liberal ideas.
Spent a great deal of money and manpower and treasure to do so as well, and a great deal of lives.
I think people just bought into this idea of a progressive being, the idea that, so you come off the back of the sort of the conservative view or the religious view that man is flawed, to this idea that he progresses and develops his own morality in conjunction with the amount of freedom he has. Or they have. So it was quite naive, but in terms of national conservatism, and what they've got on their website. So a lot of this will sound vaguely familiar to nationalists and others that share these sort of nationalist ideas. It's very telling that they would use this kind of language, but we'll get to the most important bit that they're leaving out. So you got the national independence. So they believe in national independence. It's a declaration or a statement of principles. We wish to see a world of independent nations, self-governing, making its own laws, its own decisions, under its own constitution, adhering to its linguistic, religious inheritance, with the right to maintain its own borders and conduct policies to benefit its own people. So, I don't see anything wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But to see a minister from the Conservative Party at a conference that clearly states that they are, nationalistic in their approach I think is what caused all the attention, really.
And such a senior one as well.
Yeah.
To those people listening in the future, I'd just like to give it a short word about the current influence of Suella Braverman in the Conservative Party. At this current time, on the 27th of May, 2023, the Tories are quite far down the polls. They have a big majority in Parliament, but they're going to get probably wiped out by the next election. And Suella Braverman holds the right of the party together. She is of the old Boris Johnson cabinet, or of the way of thought. She's populist. Well, I use that in air quotes, but she is of the right, and she is stopping the right of the Tory party from throwing the towel in by being in her position, and she is under great pressure from the media and from the liberal left of the Tory party to get to resign or to move on or whatever. Some context for you in the future.
Yeah, she's definitely a strange one, considering that we've also got Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister, but he seems rather weak. I think he doesn't strike me as someone that's got much influence. He strikes me as somebody that's been put there
to keep international markets from
he's got backing, but he's not a strong leader,
and he won't win an election.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting from him. I mean, Keir Starmer's well versed in politics. He's, I think he's playing the game quite well. When I say playing the game quite well, he's basically not saying much at all.
Yeah,
he's just letting current events overtake the Tory party, but he's not going to do anything about them himself.
No, I sidetracked you there, Carl. Sorry. Yeah.
But yeah, just to get back to the next one, rejection of imperialism and globalism. We support a system of free cooperation, competition among nation states, working together, trade treaties, other common projects that respect the independence of their members. But we oppose transferring the authority of elected governments to transitional or supranational bodies, a trend that pretends to high moral legitimacy, even as it weakens representative government, sows public alienation and distrust, and strengthens the influence of autocratic regimes. We condemn the imperialism of China, Russia, and other authoritarian powers. We also oppose the liberal imperialism of the last generation, which sought to gain power, influence, and wealth by dominating other nations and trying to remake them in its own image. Yeah, I mean, I've wrote stuff similar to this, that go back a few years. And to see this come out now, and I think it was written in about 2019, it doesn't fill me with, with great joy that this well-funded organisation saying a lot of this stuff that, which is fundamentally self-evident after Iraq and Afghanistan, the problems we face with legal and illegal immigration. And you'd think that you'd be happy, but it's just when they miss the crucial parts, which we will get to. You just think that they're playing the game, and they're very good at it. They know what people want. They know what people want to hear, but they just won't give it them.
And they mix in the good with the bad. So you know when a Tory is telling you that, when they come to government, you'll just get the bad, and then they'll string you along with the good. It's how they've been playing the game for decades. I mean, I think national government, I think those first two paragraphs, I don't particularly disagree with at all.
No.
But it's number 3, which I think I'm going to take you some offence to. We'll put the link in. Well, I spread the link around to what we're referring to here in the podcast notes.
Yeah.
We won't get around to posting it, so don't fear. But it's on the National Conservatism website under their statement of principles. But yeah, would you like to lead, Carl?
Yeah, I just very suspicious because they've definitely left very important bit. I mean, this is nationalism. This is the basic principles of nationalism. I mean, there's nothing like fancy here or out of the ordinary. It's just the fact that, it's the first time that anybody from a mainstream party has actually stood next to these ideas in a long time. Or should I say from the cabinet. So, national government, the independent nation state, instituted to establish a more perfect union amongst diverse communities. So this is where the problem starts for me.
Mm-hmm.
This more perfect union amongst diverse communities. So
that's not what a nation state is.
No, and we're still liberal. We're still liberal. Parties, regions of a given nation. So it's a kind of because that is the one thing that liberals. I mean, let's get it straight. That's one thing that the left and liberals do not want to give up. They do not want to give up that pluralism, that diversity and tolerance, and these are core to their beliefs, and they will not give it up, no matter how much damage it causes, no matter how much trouble people have to live with. They are not willing to give it up. And this is a declaration from the National Conservatives that they're not going to take it away from them.
And therefore, because this is the issue of our time, they've already admitted defeat. I mean, it gets much worse as we go down, but the fact that if the left, or we'll get into some of the leftist reaction to this later as well if we have time, but yeah, it just gets worse from down here. So I hate this sort of faux edginess. This, or we're the outsiders. We're being transgressive. We're standing against the woke mob, and yet you're just, it's like taking a pair of secateurs to, a rainforest. Like, you're not going to get anywhere with that.
It's just that line just sticks out from them. I mean, it's something that you could have read from the European Union.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. The EU is instituted to establish a more perfect union among diverse nations. It's
and that language, more perfect union, is used in the European Union's charters. I'm pretty sure it's ever closer union, more perfect union. Like, it's just the same wishy-washy nonsense language. There's no unity. You can't form unity from diverse communities. It's an oxymoron. Does it make any sense? You have
exactly.
Unity or diversity.
That's exactly the problem. To provide their common defence and justice among them, and to secure a general welfare and the blessings of liberty.
God.
For this time and for future generations. We believe in a strong but limited state.
Carl, for the record as well, what was Burke's opinion on the American Revolution?
He saw it coming. He didn't really have a strong opinion on it. He warned Parliament that if we didn't give the American colonies representation, they're going to take their rights as Englishmen by force.
Mm.
So that was his understanding of it. He didn't believe in the idea of individual rights, because what right do you have that I don't? No, we have the rights of our ancestors that are passed to us, and our children have the rights that we preserve or gain and pass to them. So the only way you could really see it is within the English state, we have English rights
For English people.
So he knew very early on that if the Americans were kept being denied representation as true-blooded Englishmen, they would revolt against it, and they did. So I would say he backed the American colonists, but he didn't back the French Revolution. There's a big difference, and he didn't back the French Revolution because they weren't English. So he sort of identified that the French were trying to take Anglosphere ideas of liberty, which he didn't think the French were suited for, and he said it would end in mass murder, and it did. So I think one of his favourite quotes were that the French have found equality. From the king to the lowest peasant, everybody gets the guillotine. So, yeah, he was quite scathing of liberal ideas propagating around the world. He saw a lot of these ideas only suited sort of Anglosphere, sort of like North America, Britain, Australia, sort of unique to the English-speaking people.
Yeah, and I think, and this is the problem then when you with liberalism, what we touched on in the introductory podcast was that you can't divorce. The problem is when you try to take liberalism out of its social, religious, and historical context and try and wash it all away and start applying it to, different cultures, different peoples. It just doesn't work, and you get the kind of sort of near totalitarian conformity that exists in this current day society. That you can't universalize ideas which have been only meant for a certain group of people at a certain group of time, certain time period. It doesn't work, and that's fundamentally the problem with liberalism.
So even liberal scholars, when you go back, will mention this, like John Stuart Mills. He had certain requirements for meeting
John Locke
liberalism.
As well?
Yeah, they were all of the similar mind in that a society has to reach a certain level of maturity before this sort of liberalism can take hold. But they still believed in the progressive being, the progressive nature of man. And a lot went wrong as well, like World War One was another example that, maybe man's nature's not that progressive after all. And World War Two. But each time, like, liberal thinkers had excuses. There was something stopping it from happening. It was the old institutions of the past that did it, or we just haven't given people enough freedom. I mean, you see it today in America with BLM and things like that, where defund the police. This is entirely this is entirely coherent with liberal logic. So the less coercion and the less authority people have over them, the more well behaved they'll be. That this is the progressive belief. So there is more crime in certain communities because those communities are over-policed. So to lower crime, you need to remove the police. You can say that sounds silly or whatever, but this is their belief, and I think a lot are realizing that this is not true. So the only thing left that they've got and that they're holding on to is the pluralism and the diversity and the tolerance. So it's sort of a paradox, really. International liberalism is quite strong and aggressive. You can see that with the policies that around Ukraine and Russia. But internally, the country's falling apart.
Yeah.
It's incoherent. It's one
It's a
rule
mess.
for this group and another rule for that group. And that's where they've got themselves now, in a position where they're trading one group's rights off with another group's rights. So you've got women's rights and you've got trans rights. So right, who has the right to the toilet then? You know, and this is the thing when people say, oh no, it's equal right. No, someone's rights has to supersede another person's rights. That's the problem that liberalism finds itself in at the moment. It can't overcome these internal contradictions, which goes to show that, yeah, society must have a level of maturity and understanding before it can reach this utopia. But unfortunately, it's never going to happen because they made the mistake of believing that human beings were logical and rational creatures, and they're just simply not.
Yeah.
And that their emotions, the human emotions, are quite strong and can often overrule your rational side or your logical side.
And also the accepting that isn't a bad thing either. I think, there's a lot of people with, autism in the movement. That's fair enough, but I think there's always that thing like, it's not. It's been decided by some kind of rationalist and liberal thinker somewhere that, like that all human emotion is must be disregarded from any kind of public life or decision making or anything. But I think that's just fundamentally wrong. And you look at what is, you look at like Soviet era architecture. I'm talking like post-Stalin as well, like Khrushchev era. It was made out of pure rationalism. People need houses. We need to find a way to keep a house warm in Siberia. So what do? We put everyone in little boxes and stack them on top of each other because it's cheap to build. And when you do that, you can keep everything warm nice and efficiently. Well, there's a problem with that. And you apply that across the whole Soviet Union, regardless of geography, area, culture, anything. Well, the problem is that you haven't given them any chance for people to express themselves, or any kind of human emotion, or any kind of thought of beauty, or of creativity, or even just what's nice. And then you end up with decaying estates, and you see it in this country as well.
Yeah, it's purely material. It's the good life is having that material wealth. Even to the point now in the West where you don't need a family, you don't need a man, you don't need children, you just need to work and enjoy yourself.
Yeah. And the
It's
harder
all
you work,
material.
the more you can enjoy yourself.
But the problem is, once you reach a certain age, you're spiritually starved. I mean, you're just soulless, and you can argue that. How can you prove that? And it's, well, I don't know. Maybe take a look at the amount of antidepressants that are prescribed on a daily basis. Effectively, just pumping your population full of sedatives because you've robbed them of all human dignity, of everything that makes you human. Your connection to your community, your connection to your family, the connection to your ancestors, the connection to your nation. It's all been robbed from you, and in exchange for what? An iPhone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they don't understand the fact that that's what real conservatism is, and returning to the sort of real conservatism is a rejection of that. And people can call that what they like, fascism or whatever, but it's simply just not. It's just a different way of looking at the world.
Exactly.
And understanding that human beings have a particular nature, and that liberals don't understand that nature. Conservatives do understand that nature. But that doesn't mean that conservatives interfere in societies or communities. It means they don't. They simply just become observers. It's not that change is impossible. It's just left to the community. It's organic. It's slow. It's not like 10-year plans or diversity quotas.
Mm.
Like recently, the guy from the RAF who's stepping down after 4 years, who I think made papers for actively asking his recruitment officers to discriminate against white men, for the simple fact that he'd set himself this arbitrary target of 40% of the RAF, including its pilots and engineers,
And
of being women, and 20% being of an ethnic minority background.
You've never seen more of a sausage fest, pardon the vulgar term, than like an engineering lecture, or a physics lecture is even worse. You go into one of them. I accidentally walked into one of those in my university days, and it was just, I think there were 2 women out of a room of 300 people.
But I mean, the fact is, he set himself this target knowing that I think it's something like 93% of the RAF is white male, British.
That the Royal Air Force of Great Britain is staffed with British people. Is a horror.
I mean, we've got 1,500 pilots. I believe 30 of them are female, and 3 are ethnic minorities. Now, I'm not entirely sure of the ethnic minority. I'm pretty sure I read it was 3. But yeah, by the by, it's these stupid quotas that they put on themselves. This to try and force social change. Well, this is the antithesis of conservatism. You don't force any social change. You simply reinforce the existing order and allow change only when it's absolutely wanted by the community, and it's slow, and it's done over time to create harmony. So you can definitely see the contrasting thinking, and it's why I'm somewhat disappointed in this national conservatism. It's like you say, once we get past that national government and get back onto this,
yes,
and it heads to God, public religion, no nation can endure without humility and gratitude before God and fear of his judgment are found in authentic religious tradition for millennia. The Bible has been our surest guide, nourishing and fitting orientation towards God, to the political traditions of the nation, the public morals, to the defence of the weak. Well, I mean, just to step in there, have you seen the state of our current church?
Oh, exactly. It's all kind of Christian morals has been ripped out of it. The church is meant to be God's judge on earth.
Well, it's supposed to, like it says, it rightly regarded things that are rightly regarded as the sacred. They don't hold anything sacred.
No.
Apart from liberalism.
And they don't morally judge, except, of course, if you are a conservative in these institutions, then you get hounded out of them by the rest of the liberal state and the liberal institutions. But I think it is my reason for why this happens. Just on a short tangent, is because the church over many years has built a sort of a legal and financial position with most governments in Europe and America. And the truth is that these institutions are terrified of those lucrative tax and financial loopholes being taken away from them. So they will go along with whatever the liberal order wants. I think that's the same thing. And again, why bother then with a religious institution that is so cowardly, that can't stand up for itself? Not what Jesus would do. That's for certain.
Well, this is it. When non-Christians lecture you about what Christians should do, It's just insane.
Mm.
So the Bible. So this is what gets me. They're very staunch in this regard. You know, the Bible should be read as the first among the sources of shared Western civilization in schools and universities, and as the rightful inheritance of believers and non-believers alike. Where a Christian majority exists, public life should be rooted in Christianity and its morals, its moral vision.
This is the most sort of American paragraph. You can tell that national conservatism has a certain bent to it. One of the biggest fundings behind it is Peter Thiel, who is a billionaire, very closely connected to the CIA and intelligence agencies. But this is, you can see point number 4 is a lack of understanding of the British state of mind. Yes, we've been at England and the rest of the UK has been a Christian country for the last 1500 years, but in relevant political memory in the last couple of hundred years, people have not taken this kind of attitude towards Christianity. Yes, they were Christian, but
it's just funny how they immediately go back to the pluralism, though. It's like very strong rhetoric, and then it's like, at the same time, right, so at the same time of having homogeneity...
Oh, that's true.
You want multiculturalism. I don't get it. At the same time, Jews and other religious minorities are to be protected in the observance of their own traditions, in the free governance of their communal institutions, and in all matters pertaining to rearing and education of their children. Adult individuals should be protected from religious or ideological coercion in their private lives and in their homes. So it's like you go from one extreme to the other. You either have a singular idea of unity and homogeneity, or you have the liberal idea of diversity. You can't have them both. Now, I'm not suggesting that the state oppress these groups in any way. I'm just suggesting that the state should not promote these groups in any other way. It's entirely a matter for them personally. But why can't they make that same argument, for example, for English people? Where an English majority exists, public life should be rooted in English tradition. What's wrong with that?
Very true.
But they won't say it. And that's what's missing from this. The all-important people. When they say people, they mean a government document, a passport, a piece of paper. They don't mean like flesh and blood indigenous people who are rooted here through ancestry and family and history. Later on they do make mention to race, but it's not about race. It never has been. The racialization of our societies is come with the Americanization of our societies. In the Western world, and especially in Great Britain, I don't think I once ever heard my grandparents or parents refer to themselves as white, ever.
No.
It's just something that we never identified with.
And people only identify with it when they have to. Like, for example, in the colonies, when it had to be, you did it because it was self-evident. But you are right, in terms of our history, political history, it hasn't been a relevant question because it didn't need to be a question because, again, it was certain things are naturally assumed. And this is one of these things that is naturally assumed. England is for English people. Wales is for Welsh people. Scotland's for Scottish people. It doesn't have to be. It's an organic society. It is the tree in soil that is there and is a living thing. And if you start severing the roots, or you try and plant different plants in the soil, then there is going to be a competition between species, in that scenario. So it's not a healthy way to run a society, this kind of forced diversity. It's not healthy.
No, I mean, there's a reason it existed in America because of the nature of the American state, the vast size of it, the vast number of immigrants from different European nations created a problem for their nationalism, which is where this idea of white comes in as a sort of replacement for European. But it was to create sort of a nationalism around the flag, the anthem, sort of these Americanisms. But it doesn't apply to Britain. We don't have that. We didn't have that problem. We were English, we were Scottish, we were Welsh, we were Irish. We have a very close affinity to our tribal identities, which is common across all of Europe. That it's fundamental to who we are. It's the difference, for example, between America and England is that America was named by its people, whereas England is named after its people.
Yeah.
So there are two important differences. England, I think it roughly translates in Old English into the land of the Angles. So I often say to people, if you went to a place called the land of the Penguins, what do you think you'd find?
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
It's very different in terms of history. Look, I think America was doing all right till around about the 1960s, and then they went down the same crapshoot we did. This importation of this sort of Christian nationalism, it doesn't really.
Yes, that hasn't been. Again, Christianity is an international idea, isn't it? Christianity hasn't been tied to one nation ever. Not one. Christianity is meant for all nations and all people.
That's it. It's a moral code that you can choose to follow, or in the case of often West, post Enlightenment, you can choose not to follow.
Yeah.
But it's never really been an issue for the English since Henry the Bloody Eighth. Like we just didn't see ourselves as a Christian people in that way. We were always the British, the English.
It was never. The thing is that this kind of thing of this messing up of identity, as in people can't. I think that's what's come around with America is that it's kind of this radicalization of identity. Like, are you a WASP? Are you a Italian American? Are you a Christian? If then, what kind of Christian are you? What kind of particular sect of it? Where it doesn't feel 100% natural to me, especially how many, probably like one sect of Christianity per week gets invented in America. Probably, it seems like every single church has a slightly different kind of thing. It's not the way that Europeans act. Generally, yes, we are Christian. Whether they be Catholic, Protestant, or whatever, it informs a large part of our life, but it's a private affair.
Yeah, it's not, like I say, it's definitely not something that resonates. I don't think it's certainly American in a way. They have some pretty hardline sects out there, though, don't they?
Oh yeah.
See, we don't really have that here. I mean, it's just, like I say, since Henry VIII, it's been pretty quiet. The odd flare up now and then, like Guy Fawkes and odd bits and bobs, but not like what you've seen in Europe, with the 30 Years' War and
you can see in exactly, and especially when there is a fanatical religious order that takes over, let's say the Puritan, the extreme Puritans that were in league with Oliver Cromwell. They were swiftly overthrown. People didn't like them, and a lot of those, had a lot of those Puritan idealists were Dutch, or had very strong ties rather to Dutch Calvinism. So it's it's not something that's natural. Yes, of course, Christianity is incredibly important for people's lives throughout most of
I
English
think it's
history.
important to. I think it's important to note as well that obviously these religious wars, especially the English Civil War and whatnot, is where you started to see liberalism sort of rise in prominence. The two ideas, and it's important to mention that liberalism broke with nearly 5,000 years of Western intellectual tradition
Mm.
in terms of the importance of the individual over the importance of the state or the people. So it kind of makes sense that they want all of the old, all of the dead white men gone as well as the living ones. I mean, don't think an ideology will ever admit that it got it wrong. I mean, look at communists.
Mm.
I mean, the entire communist global presence has practically just disappeared. But yet, they're still there, still preaching the same crap. See, the problem was with the Enlightenment, with sort of liberalism, is that people accepted it as sort of like a natural progression out of the sort of the Christian or the religious era. Yeah, I think especially the arguments around the conflicts in England. Is it better to have a plural society or a singular? Unfortunately, liberals won, as you can see, because it simply just expanded and expanded and expanded.
Exactly. In this point number 5, in the rule of law, again, they don't disagree with that expansion because they say in America, we should live by in accordance with the Constitution, but then they say we all agree that the repair and improvement of national legal traditions and institutions is at times necessary. And it's like, well, that's what happened. Its change was fought for through the legal channels, and I don't think there's been much of a time where law was passed illegally in the United States in accordance with the Constitution. The problem is that you don't fundamentally disagree then with sort of the liberal state and how it works. And there are problems with the Constitution, big problems with the American Constitution. The fact that it acts just like the founding is like this is when history starts. That kind of attitude that people have to it is one of them. The fact that it's the amendments were tacked onto it after a series of revolts, violent revolts against the Constitution in America, as the amendments were sort of throwing sort of scraps off the table by the elites that won the American Civil War, the American War for Independence. The Constitution is riddled with nonsense about sort of the rights of money lenders and the rights of judges and the judiciary and things like that, which again is was very radical for the time. And and then the last line of that as well, rioting, looting, and unacceptable public disorder should be swiftly put to an end. Well, yeah. Well, the problem is that it's all good, well and good saying that, but when you had the chance to do it, Trump in 2020, it wasn't done.
Tail.
You carried it out. So again, how can we trust these conservatives who are all going to tell us to vote for Ron DeSantis or Trump or whatever? And that we should even believe them.
It's funny that the Democratic Party in America are quite astute when it comes to recognizing the absurdities in amendments or sort of like constitutions that say things like free speech shall not be infringed and you have the right to bear arms. Now, anyone who looks at that and brings it to sort of a logical conclusion, there is clearly no restrictions on speech or the owning of firearms in those two statements. But yet they are more than happy to complain about the excesses of owning assault-style weapons, or whatever they say over there, and hate speech. So they're well aware of the logical conclusions to these areas. But when it comes to things like diversity and secularism, oh no, these are just fine to just continue to proliferate out of all control. It's like the idea of someone owning an AR-15 is absurd to a Democrat. The idea of me or my people being reduced to a minority within my own homeland is similarly absurd, you know?
More absurd.
So I can recognise the absurdities in a lot of liberalism and its logical conclusions, whereas you only identify some and want to keep the others, rather than admit that, yeah, it sounded good at the time, but history has proven that a lot of the fundamental ideas that liberalism was founded on have turned out not to be true. And I think this is why this organisation is pushing this conservative thinking, because, or what I might say, national conservatism, sort of the older conservatism, the proper conservatism that the left see now as fascism, you know, because they don't understand it. They can't imagine a world in where the state keeps its nose out of people's business. They just can't fathom that. Moving on, I see that they have to make a strong case for free market principles.
Yeah, it's the longest paragraph that they have, so they have to do the most justification about it, which is kind of odd.
Yeah, it's definitely we like money. We believe an economy is based on private property and free enterprise. It's best suited to promoting the prosperity of the nation and accords with traditions of individual liberty that are central to the Anglo-American political tradition. We reject the socialist principle.
It's interesting. Well, what are the other parts of the Anglo-American political tradition?
Oh no, we don't talk about them.
No, it's just this part we're interested in.
Yeah, we only want these old values. We don't want. We'll stick with the new our values, even though we've never had these values ever, not once. We reject the socialist principle, which supposes that the economic activity of a nation can be conducted in accordance with a rational plan dictated by the state.
That's a very insulting use of the word rationalism, given the sentence.
Well, it kind of is, because they're arguing for they're arguing for an economic system that's conducted by rational individuals.
Yes, and the rational market, or like rational private institutions. But again, it's an economy at the end of the day based on profit maximization. It's like, well, one is a profit maximizer who is the state, and the other is a profit maximizer which is a private organization. At the same day, you still just get the same outcome. One outcome, might have slightly more or slightly less projects, but and the fact is, for a conservative, well, that is a radical thing to hand over, given that the economy informs so much of our lives, to hand that sort of lever of power over to private interest, which can do with it what they will. Given that in their own individual way as well, is troubling when you are trying to manage a society in a holistic way, in a careful and moderated fashion.
Well, they do go on to say, the free market cannot be absolute. Economic policy must serve the general welfare of the nation.
But who enforces that then?
Well, exactly. This is always the problem, isn't it? Because they don't want to be proper conservatives.
If it's not the state, then who can enforce that? Who has the power to do that?
Today, globalized markets allow hostile foreign powers to dispel America and other countries of their manufacturing capacity, weakening them economically and dividing them internally. Oh no, we do a good enough job of that ourselves.
Yes.
At the same time, transnational corporations showing little loyalty to any nation damage public life by censoring political speech. Yeah, well, anything that what you just proposed in the first half of this paragraph is counter to what you're saying now.
Exactly. You can't have one without the other. If you have, an economy that is based on the principles of private property, of course, and people do get confused in the movement, right? Private property and personal property and things. I don't even like the term private property, because it does mean like, oh, you're trying to take away my house, or trying to take away my car, or trying to take away my pension. No, of course not. It is preventing large conglomerations of wealth owned by people who are hostile to the nation, to the people, using that power to force their way through in politics and in society.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. That sometimes private property has to be seized to stop people from using it improperly.
Yeah, I think it's important to also note that when they say private property and free enterprise, what they mean is that an individual can have the right to buy 30 houses and own a portfolio of properties.
Exactly.
That's what they mean. They don't mean like, owning your car or the clothes on your back or any of that. They basically mean that the state shall not restrict their ability to make or to grow their own economic wealth. So they want freedom from the state in the markets. They can buy and sell what they please. That's effectively what they're saying there.
Exactly, Carl. Yeah.
They don't have to have any sort of so the right for an individual. So that's why it contradicts with the welfare of the nation. How is an individual who's able to purchase 30, 40, 50 properties and then hiking up the rent for working families, putting them in hardship and denying them any possible chance of owning their own property? How is that helping the welfare of the nation? So it's very two-faced, and it's definitely an organisation that holds the rich above everybody else, especially. So effectively what they're saying is that minorities shouldn't have primacy in the law, rich individuals should have primacy in the law.
Mm-hmm.
And this showing little loyalty to the nation. Well, who did that, Flooding the country with dangerous and addictive substances and pornography. So what like Pfizer and Moderna?
Not exactly, yeah.
Oh no, they don't mean them, do they? And promoting obsessive, destructive personal habits. See, I like the little whistle there the little signal against liberalism there.
Oh yes, that is an anti-liberal statement. First one they've made.
A prudent national economic policy should promote free enterprise, of course. It must also mitigate threats to national interest, aggressively pursue economic independence from hostile powers, nurture industries crucial for national defence, and restore and upgrade manufacturing capabilities critical to public welfare. Crony capitalism, the selective promotion of corporate profit-making by organs of state power, should be energetically exposed and opposed. It's kind of like some old industrialist come back and wrote this, isn't it?
Yeah. It is like sort of late 19th century, sort of factory owner kind of a Gilded Age, and they call it in America the Gilded Age kind of thing, where it's their choice It's like I don't force them to work down that mine. I don't force them to work 14 hours a day in that factory. It's their choice.
Yeah, it's kind of like Peter Thiel's and Elon Musk's and that of the world. It's like they back this because like these conglomerates are like ganging up against them.
Yes.
So like BlackRock and these massive hedge funds well, they're just conglomerates. There's no other way to explain them. There's vast amounts of wealth under management. Like no individual can stand against that kind of force in the markets. I mean, you can tell with these ESGs, I think they're called
Environmental social governance.
Yeah. So you've got these conglomerates with trillions under management, telling companies that they have to score well in certain areas of like social progress and diversity, and so you've got companies that they've got trans sections for children and that, and it's all to get the backing, the funding from these conglomerates. Without it, if they don't play the game,
sorry, Carl. What is the National Conservative plan to stop that, which won't contradict private property and free enterprise? Private property then has limits, does it not? Free enterprise then has limits.
And that hiding your identity has limits as well. These individuals should be known.
Mm-hmm.
Those that benefit the most from these conglomerates should be known to the public, instead of hiding their wealth and identity in Panama or
exactly
the Caymans.
And I think that the main difference between us and them, because they do say free market cannot be absolute, but the main difference between us and them is that we believe those limits should be far, far lower, that people should be held to better standards, and these conservatives do not have the courage to do it.
National Conservatism it's about expanding the franchise to not just with the liberal order of conglomerates and corporations down to this sort of neoconservatism of rich individuals, but back to the sort of like the middle and lower classes getting the ability to start their own businesses. I mean, I for one would cut all tax to small businesses tomorrow. I mean, they pay enough in VAT.
Yeah.
So people might say a lot of these places the tax is virtually nothing. Well, then just get rid of it. The problem in this country, you can't say that you want to support free markets and free enterprise if you're going to tax people to the point where they can't grow.
Yeah.
And I think just recently we saw the effects of a prime minister who wanted to lower taxes. Liz Truss. And how long did she last?
Yeah. Less than a month. 27 days.
They're not interested in expanding the franchise to the middle classes. They're interested in consolidating wealth at the top. I mean, a government fundamentally is the power of people. That's what it is. That's what the state is. You shouldn't have to join a union or any of that. The government should be your union. But for some idea, this liberal idea that the state can't get involved on behalf of its people has got to be one of the most absurd things to have happened in the whole of Western history. This notion that they're only there to arbitrate between two parties, parties who have a dispute. So it's a state that's not there, but then it's all consuming when it comes to agreements made between individuals. It grows into this huge monster. The minute that you sign a contract, it's like the state is willed into existence. So it's not prepared to intervene in any other facet of life unless there's a contract. I mean, this whole idea of running a nation on these market principles is absurd.
Mm. I find on this that they sort of agree with the ends of liberalism, but they just say, oh well, you need to get there by different means. So there's point with capitalism. There's always just we want an economy based on private property and free enterprise, but it's just you can get there, but we just need to trim a few of the edges, just sort of a little bit of pullback there, a little bit more action here, and we can tinker and make the liberal system perfect. Again, and in the next point as well, we're talking about China overtaking America in the tech field. But it's like, well, why is that a problem? Because it is a problem because I'd like to see my nation be technologically advanced, but it's a problem for them because it's like, well, it's a threat to the American empire. So that's the thing. It's like, well, we say we're against globalism, but we've got to constantly be at odds with China and Russia and other great powers because America is a great global empire that must defend itself, and or the West, quote unquote. And it's just they're not they just don't get it. It's like they just see that the woke liberals are destroying real liberalism. I know they are they aren't using that language directly, but that's what it feels like to me. That it's just that you go in a bit too far.
Like, we agree with you on all the economic points. It's just some of this social stuff's a bit crazy.
Yeah.
And it's like, so we're going to position ourselves.
We agree with you in diplomatically isolating and sanctioning Iran and Russia and North Korea and China and Cuba and Venezuela. We agree that we should use like a massive international globalist structures like the World Bank, to crush these nations because they disagree with liberalism and liberalism and the liberal world order. But it's just maybe you're going a little bit too hard on Russia and not hard enough on China. Let's just reallocate resources here. That's all they're asking for.
So, yeah, I mean, in regards to China, I think I read somewhere that a quote that I found quite interesting was that the main difference between the East and the West is that in the East, so China, for example, money answers to capital answers to the government, whereas in the West, the government answers to capital.
Mm.
And that's the fundamental problem with China, is that it is a strong state, and it's very much aware of its identity and its plans, and they are national in nature. They have a national interest, self-interest. They pursue that self-interest, whereas we are sort of subservient to NATO and the UN. I mean, in a way, America, the American liberal empire.
Exactly.
But you can't really complain about China progressing rapidly with technology when we moved our factories there and then they stole all the technology. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen? That they were just going to open the doors and let you buy everything?
Mm.
Which I think is what's obviously caused this disillusionment amongst people, isn't it? The same thing that happened with Russia. It's, when the Soviet Union collapsed, they went for a period, didn't they, where they were practically being looted by foreign money.
Yeah.
And so these Russian oligarchs arose from nowhere because, well, the Russian state practically gave it to them because they were Russian. They wanted these industries back in Russian hands. I mean, China wasn't stupid enough to make that mistake and have not allowed Western companies to buy up Chinese industry.
Mm.
So China's rich because it owns its own industry. It's as simple as that. But moving on, then we'll get to probably the three final points of their principles, which I think
The
think
family and children one is, I can't really
yeah.
disagree with anything in that. Like again, but it is just self-evident. It's like, um, I guess it might be a shock to some of the die-hard libtards out there, but it is just self-evident.
So yeah.
The immigration one is
Well, the family.
Oh, go on, Carl.
Well, family, community, and nation are all one. I mean, you can't. Community derives from the family. Well, family derives from the individual. Community derives from the family. A nation derives from the community. So, when you pull it, you can't have a nation state without traditional families. It's absolutely essential and it brings me to the most important thing I think that's missing from this, and that's organic theory.
Yeah.
That they have conveniently left out of most of this, and this is about as closely as they touch on it. So they're built around lifelong bonds between a man and a woman, on a lifelong bond between parents and children. It's the foundation of other achievements of our civilization. I mean, it's the foundation of all civilization.
Mm.
Unless you tend to those foundations, you risk destroying your entire civilization. It will just collapse in on itself. A country can't be run like a company. You can't hire people at 18 and get rid of them at 65. It doesn't work like that. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Western governments are too corporate minded. I mean, I've often heard people say that, this is a country of laws, or, Parliament is a place of sort of justice and that. Well, I mean, really going back, Parliament is a place of conscience. It's not a place for solely logic and reason, which brings it round to recent events with the COVID-19 policies, the follow the science rhetoric, the blind adherence to rationalism and reason, and rather than understanding the psychological and health impacts that these policies would have on people. No liberal in good conscience should have ever taken away anybody's liberty for any reason. Putting one's life at risk is fundamental to being free, is it not?
Mm.
But it amazes me how fast people became authoritarian. Like overnight. Like overnight they were phoning police on neighbours, and it's these are people that laud themselves on being liberal and woke.
You shouldn't trust the police because they're racist. You should defend them.
But it shows you, doesn't it, that the vast majority of people don't actually understand any of these core beliefs. They just want to look like they are on the right side of history, exactly, or they are the good guys.
It is like the story of the Soviet shopkeeper who barely received a basic education from the state, but still, and probably has never read Marx, but still puts up the workers of the world unite in his shop window as a reason for that.
Because he doesn't want to be singled out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people have become conformists, which is why I'm not particularly worried when they say, well, the public are against you, which I don't think is true. I think the public actually agree with us far more than the state do, but than they do with sort of the liberal position. But there is a certain section of the public that will just do whatever the higher authority tells them to do, which is why you can say one day they can say open the borders and abolish the police, and the next day they can say close the borders because of the pandemic, and start forming on your neighbours, the police. Like, doesn't matter. They'll do whatever the state tells them to.
Yeah, no, they definitely definitely don't put much thought into what they're doing. I mean, I did enjoy a lot of the YouTube and TikTok videos where, people were just making fun of their blatant hypocrisy. I did enjoy them. They were quite funny. But it is sort of George Orwell's doublethink, isn't it? It's, holding two contrary beliefs at the same time. See, I try not to do that, but it's so easy to do these days. But yeah, they make a passing reference here to the disintegration of the family, a marked decline in marriage and childbirth. It gravely threatens the well-being and sustainability of democratic nations. Why only democratic ones?
I noticed it as well. It's very sort of Thatcheristic here. I don't want to. They may disagree with this. I don't want to. What's the word? Misrepresent them. But the whole, there is no such thing as society. There are only family and individuals. It seems like this here, as you were saying earlier, Carl, that they recognise the family, traditional family, but they don't recognise anything above it. So in traditional or conservative idea that's been in this country in the past is that, well, what is above the family? What brings the family together? The church, in christenings, marriages, funerals.
Community.
A community. In other words,
I mean,
exactly.
Family. I think derives from a word meaning familiar. So you sort of like your clan was your family because you were familiar with each other. I think it sort of changed with Christianity more towards like maternal parents or blood relatives. But then again, a lot of your community are blood relatives in a way.
That's true.
Especially in older communities. So anyone can sort of become family in that sense. But it it requires you to have been born within that community, to have grown up in that community. You can't just implant people into different communities and expect them to fit right in. It just doesn't work. I mean, they make mention here to among the causes of unconstrained individualism that regards children as a burden, while encouraging ever more radical forms of sexual license, experimentation as an alternative to the responsibilities of family and congregational life. Economic and cultural conditions that foster stable family and child raising priorities at the highest order. So if these are priorities of the highest order, then you're going to have to stop people from purchasing properties like this Smart is.
Yeah.
You're going to have to stop immigration so that housing prices can start to come down, but they're not going to do that because the stock market depends upon these increasing prices.
Yeah, and the debt, the whole debt-fueled economic system relies on it. That the line must go up. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but it's true. Like if banks aren't making money from the rising of property prices, then I'm afraid to say the UK economy collapses.
Inflation will make your life uncomfortable. Deflation will collapse the whole fucking thing.
Yeah.
It all comes down with deflation, all of it.
Because
the rich lose everything.
Like people aren't stupid. Like economists know that, rampant money printing, and people in government know, and the Bank of England knows that rampant money printing and money speculation will lead to inflation. They know it, and they do it anyway. Because it doesn't affect
policy.
Exactly. It doesn't affect them.
Inflation is the desired outcome. This is what people don't get. If they're getting inflation, it means that they're not getting deflation. So they inflate not just they're inflating the currency or devaluing the currency, but it's inflating property prices. It's inflating assets. So these are so it's the government is literally creating a money bubble.
And it will even come to an end because, the amount that British people spend on housing as a percentage of their income has risen consecutively for decades. I think it's the highest in Europe, and I believe it's around 40% of your income gets spent on housing, which is the highest in Europe and is the highest it's ever been in the UK in British history.
Well, let's just get it straight. Throughout history, England has always been the highest in terms of the cost of living for the working class and the middle classes. Always. Even at the height of our empire. We've always had a very small elite that have taken the vast majority of wealth. But
and then they use the liberal institutions then to hide behind and say, well, it's right. It's just my private property. It's just my free enterprise. You have the rights to do that too.
Yeah, I'm going to take this factory from Yorkshire and I'm going to stick it in Indonesia because it's my personal property.
And I can do what I like with it.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. I think even when you look at, see, I'm not that familiar with Adam Smith, but there are some bits I've read in terms of how to mitigate this kind of behaviour, and he simply just falls back on the idea that an individual will be loyal to his country, and then doesn't give it a second thought. So see, liberalism relied on a lot of assumptions that have just turned out to be, categorically wrong.
Yeah.
Man is not progressive. Society is not getting better. Crime rates are markedly worse. I mean, and obviously the all-important immigration. Immigration has made immense contributions to the strength and prosperity of Western nations.
But we should have that like a soundboard.
So basically,
where we play toilet sounds and six.
So basically, diversity built Britain.
Yeah.
But today's penchant for uncontrolled and unassimilated immigration, unassimilated, another important word. But how can you assimilate people that you've just said earlier that you want to create a better union of diverse peoples? So you can't have both.
Yeah.
You can't have a union between diverse peoples and have assimilation. You just can't have both. This is the problem, because of their attempt to avoid the obvious. They become incoherent, and we know what the obvious is: that a nation is its people. It's not its race. It's not any of these abstract social constructs that we all argue about. They are flesh and blood people who share a common ancestry, a common language, a common culture.
Exactly.
Who belong together. And this attempt to avoid that discussion is the very problem with conservatism. And then the counter argument to any attempt of this discussion is to immediately go from 0 to 100. Straight from an intelligent discussion about implementing conservative policy to just complete absurdities, to references of instances of mass murder in the past. I mean, it's absurd. And I think Edmund Burke, I don't know the quote off by heart, but Edmund Burke himself said that people that jump straight to absurdities are not serious people. And that's the problem that we have, is that any attempt to discuss any true conservative policies or nationalist policies, we are immediately dragged into the absurd. And I think just to finish it off with the so they make the obligatory statement to race.
God, here we go.
So we believe that all men are created in the image of God. Now, what about women?
Yes.
And the public policy should reflect that fact. No person's worth or loyalties can be judged by the shape of his features or the colour of his skin or the results of a lab test. The history of racialist ideology and oppression and its ongoing consequences requires us to emphasize this truth. We condemn the use of state and private institutions to discriminate and divide us against one another on the basis of race.
Oh, good Lord.
The cultural sympathies encouraged by a decent nationalism offer a sound basis for conciliation and unity among diverse communities. The nationalism we espouse respects and indeed combines the unique needs of particular minority communities on the common good of the nation as a whole.
Like, take out the word nationalism. Like,
We just remove that entirely. It doesn't belong here.
no, exactly. It's an insult to use that word.
Nobody's
in
talking
that.
about race. Nobody's
Yeah.
interested in race.
Like,
we're
and the fact is, it's just like, okay, well, you can say it doesn't matter. I mean, but you know, why, for example, were a racialist ideology? Why was that developed? You know, in certain countries at certain times. It's because you can just draw, you know, distinctions based on race between people who are living in the same area. But, you know, the answer to that is not to have, you know, people that have radically different groups living together in the same polity. You know, it's
well, this is it. But
true nationalism wouldn't have that.
But this is the interesting part, and this is what I mean about the Americanisms. That it's got nothing to do with race or the colour of somebody's skin. It's got everything to do with culture, religion, language,
heritage,
kinship, ancestry. You know, history. Like, to just boil it down to race is lazy, and that language there is just lifted from the left.
It is
entirely.
It's total leftism.
It's just absolute nonsense. We need to get past this idea of individualism and individual rights. But the problem is people are frightened of what that means. And this is what sort of our job on the right is to sort of alleviate those concerns. That we, you know, it's not going to be about a state telling you what to do like the communists, you know, like communism, where you're all herded into cattle carts and sent to work the farm. Like, that's not what national conservatism is. But to just finish off with those points, that there's one important thing that they're missing, and that's a lot of the philosophy behind national conservatism that was espoused by people like Edmund Burke, David Hume, probably two of the main characters, Thomas Hobbes, is the organic theory. It's the idea that a state is similar to or operates like an organism. It's biological in nature. It's not a machine with replaceable part, which is what mass immigration is. It's the liberal view of human beings as fundamentally as cogs in a machine that can be replaced.
Exactly.
Whereas organic theory says no, obviously there is an economic life in a nation, but there's also a national life, and a communal life, and a family life. And the problem is this economic theory, these liberal economic principles have saturated every aspect of a nation to the point where they see all interactions between individuals as transactions. And this is why you see people on subways who don't talk to each other, because they don't wish to enter into a transaction with somebody. Or this nonsense of personal space, and you know, and until we get until we can revive these ideas of family, community, and what that actually means, a national life, sort of like, you know, for example, taking it back to sort of the 17th sort of like the early 18th, 19th century of workers, fighting for paid leave and holidays, and that was men attempting to fight to have some kind of family, communal, and national life rather than being worked to death.
Yes, exactly. And a life that was robbed them that they did have, in sort of the pre-industrial era. Now, I'm not against industrialization or industry, but it's clear to me that there is no coincidence that the liberal system came about in conjunction with the Industrial Revolution, because that kind of that glut of labour, that kind of sort of labour being cheap, and if something's cheap, you can exploit it, and then people with poor morals will do it. And that's the problem. That's why you need a strong state as well. And this is the thing that these national conservatives don't understand, is that they can talk about this all, but whether when it actually push comes to shove, they need to use power, but they refuse to. They don't, because again, it is that liberal principle of they are want to see a reduction in the size, in the size and power of the state. They want to see it. They're afraid of using it. They think it's immoral to use it. They think that it's on an individual level. It harms the individual. To be supported by a structure larger than themselves. It's this sort of like that cowboy open range mentality, which doesn't work. And it's not healthy, and it's not desirable. It should work, because outside of a few sort of very neural divergent people, it's natural for people want to have that community, because it's natural for people want to have a family, and your community is just a natural extension of that family. In fact, if you study it, it's just a larger version. And again, it's the way that humans seem to have evolved, and you can rally against that, and you can scream into the wind, you can scream against nature, scream against God, but at the end of the day, they're not going to listen to you.
You can also see that they have a problem with that kind of language as well. The true language of the right, that sort of natural, organic language. They don't like it. They don't like the idea that a political society or a society as a whole can be healthy or sick.
Mm-hmm.
They don't like the idea that someone can put forward that society is sick. I mean, we still have remnants of that language. I mean, I'm sure you've heard phrases like, body politics.
Yes.
These are sort of tie-overs from sort of organic theory. And this goes back as far as, you could argue, as far as Plato in the Republic. I think he makes mention of the city-state being like a physical body. A body politic, and each sector of society is assigned a function, and that, and as long as everybody works to their best ability in their assigned function, that creates a healthy city-state. So, it goes as far back as that. I mean, I know he mentions guardians and producers. I can't remember the third, but, this is sort of seen as like the beginnings of this kind of thinking, and this is where liberals really did just, throw everything overboard and was like, no, just let people do what they want. That was the key to all of this, was to just get rid of all coercion, all authority, just get rid of all of it. And somehow, through some magic, this utopia would just manifest. Whereas, I mean, you look at the Marxists, where they're like, yeah, we kind of believe the same thing, but until that happens, we're just going to keep a tight rein on things. Whereas sort of like national conservatism or organic theory is kind of like, no, just leave it alone. Leave it alone. It's not your place to interfere. And you certainly won't make it better with your efforts. You probably make it worse. It's like an old saying, isn't it? The hardest thing to do sometimes is to do nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is a lot of the problem with the liberal world order. It just can't see itself not doing nothing. Just it always has to intervene, even though that it generally ends up making it far worse than what it was. You just look at the mountain of bodies that was left in Iraq after the intervention. I've no doubt that they thought that they were doing it for the right reasons. I'm sure some people had other motives, but ultimately they couldn't have foreseen the damage that they ended up causing, which was far worse than what would have happened if they'd have just left Iraq alone.
Go on.
And they miss that important part of understanding. I think it's like when I look at Iraq and Afghanistan, to me these are organic societies. They can't just be you can't just tamper with them. They're living communities and living people. It's seeing it all as just individuals with individual human rights. It doesn't work. I mean, if you ask me, there's no such thing, and I suppose it'll be one of the things that we'll have to talk about, the idea of individual rights or human rights, and we'll talk about. I suppose we'll have a good discussion about that and the dangers of that kind of rhetoric and thinking. But yeah, they definitely missed a lot out in terms of the organic society, which was fundamental. I mean, it was very important to Edmund Burke. Especially around the French Revolution, he was very scathing of that. He tried to reinforce traditional conservatism, and I mentioned Burke because it was the Burke Society that invited him.
Yes, but I think the Evan Burke Society is pretty much endorsed everything the National Conservatives believe and think.
He was a strong advocate for the ideas of hierarchy, paternalism, maintaining established orders, traditional supporting the concept of organic society, that humans should not attempt to reform society as those involved in the French Revolution had tried to do. Reform instead should be pragmatic, not principled or ideological. It is not the breakdown of society. If not, the breakdown of society may follow. And the society is naturally hierarchical, and people should be rewarded differently in pay and status depending on their position in the hierarchy.
I think the problem is then, it's not only because absolutism is also a French idea as well. And people that doesn't exist today. Essentially, it means the divine right of kings, and that the king gets to use the country, the nation, as his sort of personal property.
Oh, he's absolute ruler, isn't
he?
Yeah.
So this was a problem in France, is that the reasons why the French Revolution happens, is because you had these two forces of totalizing liberalism against totalizing monarchism. More monarchical rule, and what Burke is advocating is not for either, because absolutism was radical for its day. It was radical. It radically smashed the old feudalism, the old system of rights, of different classes of people, and it caused a lot of problems. Again, it was and also an Enlightenment ideal as well. That these two ideas sort of came about at the same time, and it's a fundamentally more rational system as well. Absolutely, in a way of saying, well, if you do have the king ordained by God, then again, and if he's born to rule, then he is, God's representative in that nation. Therefore, he has the right to do what he sees, what he pleases. But that's why, and Burke, would want a system where there are not to use it in a liberal sense, but checks and balances and a way for reform and a way to mitigate in a peaceful and ordered way societal issues, not to get them to the point where you had in France in the 1780s, not to let it boil over into that kind of conflict. But there's a National Conservative Twitter account that I'd like to go over because there's a few interesting tweets. Lots of speakers, an impressive list of speakers at the conference that was last week. But the one that comes out to me was sort of the headline quote from Amandeep Bogal. I do apologise if I'm mispronouncing his name. A guy who reportedly calls himself both British and Indian. He says, whatever the faith, whatever the ethnicity, whatever the origin, nation first, flag first, every single time. A sense of belonging, a sense of identity, a sense of pride. The problem is that, what does when you say whatever the faith, whatever the ethnicity, whatever the origin, then what does a flag actually mean? A flag is a piece of cloth, because a flag is meant to represent a people. A national flag represents a people. So you can't say whatever the ethnicity, it's impossible. Because you will be represented by the Indian flag. I mean, that's just who you are, And that's fine, I have no problem with that. But you can't say I'm a different faith, I'm a different ethnicity, I come from a different country, but I'm going to put your flag first. That's not genuine, I'm sorry. And if if you have fooled yourself into believing that, I am sorry for you. But again, you can't have our identity because you're not one of us. It's that simple,
Well, that's it. This is what I mean. They miss out the most important thing, and it makes it incoherent. It's just absolute nonsense.
Mm-hmm.
It's this attempt to not be Sivnat, but we're Sivnat.
Yeah.
But we're not Sivnat because we don't want assimilation. We want a more perfect union between diverse communities. Mm. What is that?
Today, the Union Jack and the Indian Tricolor are global synonyms for freedom, liberty, and democracy. So what's the point then? Because the Google logo is synonymous with freedom, liberty, and democracy. The McDonald's logo is synonymous with freedom, liberty, and democracy.
But this is it. It's where's the nationalist thinking in that?
Exactly.
Now, I want sovereignty for my people. I want freedom for my people.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way that you can guarantee you can have sovereignty and freedom. Rely on this notion of individualism and a lot of thinking on the right, especially in the conservative, this sovereign individual. Is that we all to get a seat on the UN then? Because every single human being on the planet gets a seat on the UN. Because we're all sovereign now, apparently. No, we depend upon the state in many ways. States have become very complex and involved in people's lives, and it should function in accordance with human nature. Which, yes, logic and reason is a part of it, but it's not the whole part of it. And that's the problem.
Darren Grimes, the key themes of
Grimes.
Yeah, the key themes of the National Conservative Conference, UK, tell us it's not the fundamentals of liberalism that many speakers take exception to, but the extreme ideological form that surrounds us. Conservatives ought to reject it and offer instead answers to problems that impact us all. So that's what it says. Just take a pair of secateurs to the jungle and start snipping. You'll cut it down in about 1 million years if you're lucky. But it's just going to keep on growing.
Well, this is the thing. So the West sort of fell into that sort of juristic theory. It tries to explain the nature of everything in legal concepts.
Mm-hmm.
So I think liberals rely on that a lot. They do seem to frame everything in terms of legal concepts. I mean, when liberals or the left have any complaint about anything, where's the first place they run to? The courts. That's the first thing they do. It's straight to straight to the lawyers, which I find funny that we have this sort of charade in the UK, don't we, where the government sort of is like, the courts have said it, and it's like Parliament is sovereign. The courts don't tell you what to do. They've got no power at all in regards to telling you what to do. You could pass a law in Parliament tomorrow to stop mass immigration, for example. And and no lawyer can stop that, because that's once it is signed off and it's given royal assent, that's it, job done. The sovereign can't be challenged in law. So the court's authority is derived from the sovereign, which is Charles.
Yeah.
So he's above the courts. It's as simple as that. It's just how it works. People might not like it, but you have to have something above. This attempt of separation of power with the Commons and the Lords is an attempt to curtail the sovereign's power. So it's now more of just a ceremonial thing, a signature thing. But once it's signed, it's significant. It's done. Mm-hmm. So we got this situation where Liberals have that sort of juristic theory that they run on, but the country doesn't operate in that way. It still operates in a traditional way. But what gets me is Conservatives try to hide that, as if somehow the public will be displeased to find out that it's not the way that the Liberals say it is.
Yes.
And I don't believe that's the case. Or it could just be that they're lazy and they don't want to argue the point or make the argument. So, I mean, can you remember when Boris Johnson broke Parliament and...
Oh, God. Stop the coup! Stop the coup! Oh, God.
And and they were saying that the Supreme Court found him guilty. No, they didn't.
No,
they didn't. They just basically said, "Well, we don't agree with what he did. We're going to send him some recommendations. Don't you do that again, please?"
Yeah. I mean, in fact, again, the thing is all like the powers of prorogation are, 1,000 years old. But like, when was the Supreme Court of the United Kingdom invented? Oh, that's right, in like 2002 by Tony Blair. Yeah. It might not be 2002, but it was like a Blairite institution.
It was just theatre.
When Parliament is in deadlock over a national issue, the only right and proper thing to do is to disperse Parliament and call a general election. That's it. It's very simple, Like if an elected assembly of the people can't make a decision, then it's time to have a new assembly of the people, because this current one can't agree.
And I'm not 100% sure. My memory's a bit vague on this. But didn't Bercow hand the agenda to the opposition, the timetable? He did something that caused a lot of trouble because it's something that's never been done before.
It was on the amendments to the Brexit bill or something. I think.
It broke convention, which is something you're not supposed to do in the UK. We don't have a written constitution, so we rely on convention and case law.
Particularly as the Speaker of the House of Commons as well,
Well, that's his job. His job is to adhere to convention.
Exactly.
But Bercow, as he calls himself, decided he was going to go against that. I think that's one of the reasons why he hasn't received his knighthood, has he? He upset the Conservatives.
Oh, yes. Yeah, because he was a Tory MP as well. But yeah, I mean... exactly.
I'm sure once Starmer gets in, he'll be knighted.
Oh, God, yeah.
But I think it's important to mention as well that sort of a little bit on the Marxist theory of the state as well. So
maybe for next time, Carl. Actually, we'll go on that. But maybe if it's quick, I suppose we can build on it next time. But if it's quick.
Well, I think a lot of people are very familiar with the Marxist ideas that ancient and feudal societies existed to exploit slaves, and capitalist society exists to exploit workers. Plantations existed to exploit slaves. So, they have a very, they have kind of a very strict doctrine on history. very tight control over narrative. Yeah, Marxists are very interesting. Well, we'll definitely do it at a different time. I mean, I don't know how long have we been at this now.
2 hours.
Yeah, I think that's enough.
Yeah. I mean, there's a bunch of other tweets I'd like to get onto the National Conservatism thing, but we might not have time.
We'll pick it up again. I don't think this will be the end of this because there's still a lot to talk about, and we'll get a little bit into organic theory a bit more.
Yeah, one thing that really sums up, the fact that these people can't realise. This is what I'll finish on. Part of Emma Webb's speech, very pretty woman, probably not a lot going on upstairs, though I don't want to be mean. But she says, recently Oldham Council demolished a beautiful Victorian church because they said that if they didn't, it would get vandalised. They are vandals. Well, obviously, that's a cope reason for the council, but she doesn't tell us what the real reason is. Those who are supposed to be caretakers of our inheritance can't be trusted. Well, it's our inheritance, but it's not their inheritance. What's the demographics of Oldham like? I presume that it's not a lot of English people in Oldham anymore. So why would they preserve a Victorian church? It's not for them. It's not their culture. It's not their history. So I don't, why would they? And this is the problem that people like Emma and the National Conservatives won't answer.
Well, this is where we have to hold them
exactly
to account.
You can't have a collage of what they were saying in their founding principles. A collage of different peoples working together in a nation.
You can't have a nation of assimilated, unassimilated, diverse, homogenous individuals.
Exactly. Exactly. That sums it up. You can't have the anti-liberal liberal state.
You can't have the small big government.
Yeah.
The state-controlled free market.
Yeah.
This is where they've
you can't have a controlled free enterprise.
Because they don't want to talk. They don't want to get into the language of nationalism, the language that matters.
Mm-hmm.
The truth of it. We are a people. We exist. We might not be friendly to each other. We might argue with each other, but the fact remains: we have a shared history, a shared culture, and a shared ancestry, and it binds us in ways that we that can't be explained. The whole is more than the sum of its parts, and until somebody can figure that out, we're stuck with going back to not sticking our nose into society and trying to shape it as we see fit, and then allowing people to live an organic life, a life in where they're the most happiest and healthiest. And I think we'll leave it there.
Yep. All right. Until next time.
Yep. Until next time, mate. I'll catch you in a bit. Have a good one.
You too, Carl. You too.